a relationship that has neither ended up serving Pakistan well nor serving it. So it is really for the United States today to reflect whether this, what are the merits of it.
Those who politicize the UNSC 1267 sanctions regime, sometimes even to the extent of defending proclaimed terrorists, they do so at their own peril. If you look at the whole 370 issue, what was a temporary provision of the Constitution was finally put to rest. This was supposed to be majoritarian. Now tell me, what was happening in Kashmir was not majoritarian.
Signature of Naya Bharat. Even as the EAM speaks firm, Jaishankar talks tough. It's straight talk. It's simple, but it's very, very clear. When you have absolute clarity, then you are able to say the most complex things most simply. Professor Brahmachalani is with us. Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies with us. Professor Brahmachalani, a strategic affairs expert and of course a very, very famed columnist and thinker. Let me ask you, Professor Brahmachalani, do you believe that Subramaniam Jaishankar is taking what is India's worldview and he's got absolute clarity on it?
I'm losing you, Anand. I can only hear parts of what you're saying.
Can you hear me now? Am I audible? All right, we'll try and sort the line out with Professor Brahmachalani. But Raymond Vickery, good to have you with us. Thank you. How would you see Mr. Jaishankar's responses to the questions that have been posed vis-a-vis US, Pak, China?
Well, I think that this is a great opportunity for these two greatest democracies on earth to cement the partnership further. I think that the tone should not be, hey, can we demonstrate how independent we are from the United States, but what can India and the U.S. do together? Using language like you're not fooling anybody does not, in my view, further that goal. It might be said, hey, you're not fooling anybody by trying just to talk about Pakistan and Kashmir when there are wider global issues, Ukraine, China, threats to India and the United States. So the real point here is that these meetings ought to be used and these visits ought to be used to further the partnership rather than to try to score political points about how independent one nation is from the other.
But what happens, Mr. Vickery, is the fact that everything cannot be seen from America's point of view. If Mr. Jaishankar puts out India's point that if you are saying that you are selling F-16s to Pakistan for anti-terror operations, that's a laughable suggestion. So, and if he turns around and says America has to choose, which nation does it have to gain more if you engage with it more? Is that an unfair point?
Is it really in India's interest to have the United States completely disengage with Pakistan? I don't think so. It seems to me that we have shown our hostility to some of the Pakistanis, including giving shelter to Osama bin Laden, including to giving shelter to the Taliban. And we should work on those together. But the approach ought to be, yes, how can we change policies if it's necessary? How can we attack the Haqqani network? What can we do to bring peace and stability to the world throughout the area? So it's not just a question of whether or not that's a correct thing to say. The question is it useful in terms of furthering the U.S.-India relationship, and how can it best be attacked as a diplomat rather than someone trying to show for a political reason how independent you are.
But the point is that America should not have India's views as conditional to what it does with Pakistan, just like India will not have, if you expect India to not have its views conditional to how US engages with Pakistan. America should also not have, America also needs to see it in that aspect, because you cannot, on the one hand, empower a nation with F-16s for anti-terror ops, while saying, hey, we found you patronizing Ayman al-Zawahiri. The Haqqani network has been propped up as 50% of the government in Taliban in Afghanistan by Pakistanis. And you just now said that the Americans have an interest in taking down the Haqqani network. The Americans knew that the Haqqanis were going to be in the seat of power and government there. So, Professor Brahmachalani is with us. Professor Brahmachalani, what do you think is Mr. Jaishankar doing? Is he putting forth India's point of view and India's worldview very, very firmly there? Or is this plain speak going to hurt us diplomatically? As Mr. Raymond Vickery says, this is not how nations should be speaking if they want to work together.
Well, I think first it's important to remember that Jaishankar was addressing Indian Americans. So he's basically trying to manage the media back home. This is not really tough talk. It's not plain speak to the Americans. It is like, doing public relations in a way. The fact is that the relationship between India and the US is strong. India holds more annual military exercises with America than with any other country. US arms sales to India are booming. In fact, they went from near zero to 20 billion in about 12 years, actually, from 2008 to 2020. The issue is this, that the American policy decisions and actions are compounding India's regional challenges. How can a friend of India do things that are inimical to India's strategic interests? You have to look at the developments since last year, when Biden surrendered Afghanistan to a terrorist militia. And then see the latest developments of this month. The way the Biden administration is embracing Pakistan, the way it's seeking to co-opt, to engage with the Taliban. There are a series of concessions that are being made by Washington to the Pakistan Taliban combined, and these concessions are going to haunt India's security. And look at the paradox. One day, with American help, Pakistan secures a $1.1 billion bailout from the IMF to help avert a debt default. And then just 6 or 7 days later, Washington cuts a deal with Islamabad, a $450 million deal with a bankrupt nation to modernize its F-16 fleet. And to make matters worse, Washington claims that the modernization of the F-16s is for counterterrorism. And that's a joke, right? And then with the Taliban, the Americans say we do not negotiate with the terrorists. And yet, periodically, the U.S. is cutting deals with designated terror groups. In the latest case, the U.S. released a convicted Taliban drug lord, a narcotics kingpin who was serving a life sentence in the U.S. They exchanged him for an obscure American who had been kidnapped by the Haqqani network, a U.S. designated terror group. So here is a case of the Americans negotiating with a terrorist group that they themselves designate as a terrorist entity.